Well, good morning, Bayshore. I am so glad you're with us today for today's service. We're actually finishing a series today called Hopeless, and we're so glad that you're with us. And I want to welcome our online family. We have people listening throughout our community, all over the community, and also different parts of our country. I want to say a big hello to Kelly Thaw from Pittsville, Maryland. And Kelly's been listening regularly. Thank you so much, Kelly, for being with us today on our online service. And how about this, Diane McAllister, regularly listening from Sacramento, California. Diane, hello. It's been great to have you part of our online congregation. And also, I want to welcome Teresa Baker from Derby, Kansas. So anyhow, it's just great to have people that are joining together around our faith to study the Word and to grow in the Lord. So glad that you're part of the online experience. But I want to say a big shout out to our Fenwick Island campus. I love everybody at Fenwick Island. You guys are the best. I just could go through all the names of people I'm thinking about right now, and I'm so grateful that you guys are there and a part of today's service. I want to say a big hello to Red and Denise Parsons. I know they serve regularly down there, and as many of you do as well. So, hey, just want to say hi to you guys and love you guys. And if you're new to Fenwick Island, we're just so glad that you're a part of this brand new campus and you're experiencing the great things that God is doing. Well, listen, we want to talk today about different things. We've been talking about different things that lead to our feelings of hopelessness, when we feel hopeless. And we want to talk about today about one of the big things I think that can make us feel hopeless, and that is a sense of isolation or loneliness. Isolation or loneliness. Now, I don't want you to raise your hand if you've been ever experienced isolation or loneliness, but it's a big deal when you feel isolated. And you can even be in a group of people and feel isolated. So we're going to talk about how to deal with that. Karen and I are big Survivor fans. CBS has Survivor, I think like 40 some seasons. And when COVID started, we started watching Survivor. We had a little extra time, so we started watching Survivor, and we've watched probably 10 seasons so far. We watch about a season a week, and so we've been enjoying that. But recently we were watching the Cook Islands season when the survivors, I think it was 19 survivors that were put on one of the Cook Islands, and they had one aspect in that particular season what they called Exile Island. And Exile Island was where you would get sent, the winning team after a challenge could send you one person to Exile Island. And how it worked, if you're not a Survivor fan, there's actually two challenges or two competitions they have. They have a reward competition, and that is when the two tribes compete against each other to get some type of reward, maybe blankets or food or whatever. And then there's an immunity challenge where you can win immunity for your tribe or whatever. But after the reward challenge, if you lose the reward challenge, if your tribe loses, the winning tribe can send somebody to Exile Island, and that's an island that's all isolated, and they send one person for 2 days on Exile Island. Here's a picture of one of the Exile Islands here, and it's I think this is the Cook Island thing. You got the figuration of a skull there, and it's a barren place, and there's nobody there. You have to make your own fire. You have to boil the water so the water is good to drink, and you have to get your own food, and you're there all by yourself. Now, in the Cook Island season, there was one girl by the name of Candace, and here's a picture of Candace. And Candace was sent to Exile Island 3 times. 3 times. That means a total of 6 days she was all by herself. And one of the days that she was there, it was raining, it was really cold, and it just showed her, just crying, and she felt so miserable because she was alone. Now, I don't know if you've ever felt like you've been on Exile Island all by yourself, but I think every one of us have felt that. We felt that sense of being cut off from people, from being completely isolated, and it's a big deal. I remember the first time I felt sort of really lonely. I'm not by nature a person that feels lonely very much. I can kind of occupy myself with a book or whatever, but I remember the first time I felt lonely. It was when I was 12 years old. I was sent to camp, a church camp, Nazarene church camp. I was 12 years old. I knew one girl from our neighborhood, and we went up to Northeast Maryland to this camp up there, and I was up there, and they put this girl that was just a little bit older than me, put her in another section of the camp, and I was left with a bunch of kids that I didn't know at all. And I remember that 10-day camp experience, how lonely I was. I was homesick, first time I was ever homesick, and it was a painful feeling. to be cut off from my family, to be cut off from everybody that I knew. And toward the end of it, I made a few friends, but it was really, really tough. So there's a lot of things in life that can make us feel isolated. Now, here's what I think. I think that sometimes when you move into a new community, you're brand new to a new community. And by the way, Delaware and the Eastern Shore and Maryland, we're such a great place that people are moving here from everywhere. And we're so excited about at Bayshore. We have people that have moved here from states all around us that are finding a wonderful home here. And Bayshore has it as our mission to open our arms and love people that are moving into this community. You know, the Bible says a lot about how we treat strangers, the people that come into our community. Here's a couple verses for you to think about. Here's what the Lord said to the Israelites in Exodus 22, verse 21. Do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner, for you were foreigners in Egypt. And Deuteronomy 10, 19 and 20, and you are to love those who are foreigners, for you yourselves were foreigners in Egypt. Lots of scriptures. It says that an elder in the New Testament churches had to be a person of hospitality, warm and inviting people. And it says in the book of Hebrews, be careful because sometimes you've entertained strangers, but they were really angels. So, you know, sometimes when you move to a new community, you feel completely isolated. And Bayshore has as our mission, a mission to embrace and love people that move into our community that are maybe foreigners to Sussex County and the counties around us. So that's an important thing for us to remember. I remember when Karen and I moved to Pensacola, Florida. I think I was 21 and Karen was she was about that same age, and we moved down there to go to Bible college, and we were newly married, been married about a year, and we moved to a city where we knew no one. We knew no one. There was nobody in that town that we knew, except for one man that moved down there to go to school, and his name was Carl, and we barely knew him. But I remember we're riding around trying to find a place to rent, and there's a big blue Impala car behind us, and it had lights flashing, and we put off to the side, and it was Carl from Delaware, and he said, "You're a long way from home, aren't you?" And he had us over, and we had soup, and we got to know each other, and it was just great to be welcomed in. But sometimes if you're new to a new community, you can feel isolated and alone. Can you imagine what it was like for the children of Israel when they were taken captive from their homeland where the temple was and where they lived, and they were taken to Babylon? Do you know what it says in Psalm 137? It says, "By the rivers of Babylon we wept." They were very lonely because they were separated from their home. So that's an important thing for us to remember. So you can feel that. We can feel that. And so we have a ministry to reach out to people like that. But here's another thing. How about COVID-19? Don't you feel like in some senses COVID-19 has sort of pushed us away from each other? That we've been pushed away and physically with social distancing, which is such a good idea, by the way. It's something we have to do, and it's very important that we comply with that. But social distancing has sort of pushed us apart physically. And I think my prediction is that there are people listening to me today in this message that you feel separated and you feel isolated from other people. And you're feeling that. You're feeling that separation, especially if you're a hugger. Now listen, I'm a hugger. I like to hug people. When people come to church on Sunday morning before COVID, I was always out in the parking lot, and I'm hugging on people. I like to hug people. That's just how I am. I got that hugging ministry from my mom. My mom was the pastor's wife to my dad. My mom went to heaven about a year ago, but my mom, her ministry, she didn't play the piano, she didn't play the organ, she didn't lead the ladies' ministry. What she did was every Sunday, she sat on the back pew of my dad's church, Christ Evangelistic Church in Laurel, Delaware. She sat in the back pew, and the entry door would come right by her pew, and everybody that came in to that building, she'd give them a big hug. And I just was thinking the other day, how would she cope during COVID-19? I think it would be so hard for her not to be able to hug people. And I think sometimes because we can't touch each other anymore, and we're feeling maybe a little bit isolated. Now, if you're not the hugger type person, social distancing is an answer to your prayers. You're so glad you don't have to hug anybody anymore. Have you ever hugged anybody that's not a hugger? It's like trying to give a cat a bath. I mean, they're fighting you the whole time. But I think if you are a person that is not able to touch other people, and you are a person that likes to hug and you like to connect, maybe you're feeling that sense of isolation. Because there's an incredibly powerful ministry in touching, when somebody touches you in a kind and loving way. I remember I was in Van Nuys, California, a number of years ago. I was at Jack Hayford's church in Los Angeles, California, and there was about 50 pastors there for this little seminar that he invited 50 pastors to come to, and I was privileged to go, and he had us share some of our stories and some of our struggles in ministry, and it came to my point to share, my time to share, and I'm starting to kind of unload my story and my ministry and what I've been going through. And Pastor Jack, this wonderful, loving shepherd, great Bible teacher, as I'm talking, he comes over to me and he puts his hand on my shoulder and just rubs my shoulder as I'm telling my story. And you know what? I felt incredible liberty and peace in my heart as he did that. There's power in touch. Jesus many, many times touched people. He touched the leper and he healed them. Remember Peter's mother-in-law that was sick, and Jesus healed her. It's interesting, Peter didn't ask his mother-in-law to be healed, but Jesus just took the initiative. I don't know what's going on there. But anyhow, the Bible says that Jesus touched Peter's mother-in-law and the fever left her. There is healing in touch. And the day is coming, friends, the day is coming when COVID is going to be in our rear view mirror and we'll be able to embrace again. That's not where we are right now, but that's where we will be one day again. If you like that idea, let me know on the screen and say a big amen wherever you are, because I think we need to encourage each other. Great story in Acts chapter 20, and then I'll move on beyond this point. Acts chapter 20, the Bible says that Paul is coming to Jerusalem for the sort of the last time, and he stops at Ephesus, or near Ephesus, a place called Miletus, and he called some members of the church from Ephesus. He had been with them for a year and a half or so, and he called them, and they came, and Paul poured out his heart, and he said that he was going to go to Jerusalem and probably never be back to Ephesus again. The Bible says they knelt down on the beach. And they prayed. And then they got up and embraced each other. The Bible says, Paul said in one of his letters, to greet each other with a holy kiss. So affection was very much a part of the early church. And let me just say one more thing about this point. If you have kids, if you have little kids, if you have dads, if you have daughters, it's important that you put your arm around them and love them and touch them. That's an important thing. I did it to my kids. Now, if you got boys like I do, you never hug your boys in front of their friends. You never want to do that. You want to push them down, be rough with them when their friends are there. But when their friends aren't there, you want to put your arms around them. If you've got daughters, I got little granddaughters, and I hug on them. And you know why I do that? I hug them because I want them to know what healthy, loving touch feels like. Because kids, sometimes that don't get the hugs that they need, they turn to drugs, or they turn to illicit relationships because they've never received the healthy touch that they were designed to receive. But listen, sometimes we can feel isolated. We can feel isolated because we're not able to touch each other anymore. And we just don't feel the intimacy with each other. And so that could be something that's happening in you. Maybe you're a person that just thrives on that type of connection. And these times are very hard for you. Another thing that can make us sort of isolated is criticism. When somebody criticizes us. Have you ever received criticism and it just made you want to go into a shell? Maybe your parents were too harsh with you and you're trying to explain what was going on and they're not listening and they just kind of are criticizing you, and it just makes you shut down and you go into your shell and you go into that cave. Sometimes when you're criticized, it can really make you feel isolated. Think about leaders that are leading organizations. It says, somebody said once that it's lonely at the top. And, John Maxwell says, well, it shouldn't be. We should take everybody up with us as we're becoming greater leaders. And I think that's definitely true. Bring people with you as a leader. Bring them to the top. But also, there are those moments when the buck stops with you and you feel that that loneliness. Maybe you're leading a company. Maybe you're leading something that's important. Or maybe you're a single parent. You're a single parent. And there's nobody there to back you up. And you are given the guidance to your adolescent kids, and they're just giving you a hard time, and they think you're the dumbest thing they've ever seen in their whole life. Remember what Mark Twain said? He said, when I was 14, my dad was so stupid I could barely stand to have the old man around. But when I was 21, I was amazed at how much that man had learned in 7 years. How about that? You know, when we get older, we have a greater appreciation for our parents. I remember when my dad was trying to, guide me and direct me, and I was kind of a wild adolescent, and I gave him a fit, and I know I turned his hair gray and made his hair fall out. I mean, I was really, really a difficult child to raise. But, being a parent sometimes, especially a single parent, you feel all by yourself. You're making these hard decisions, and the kids are mad at you, and they don't like you, and you feel isolated, and you feel alone. I just want to say to you that you are not alone, and your job is not to be the best friend of your kids. Your job is to lead them with integrity, to lead them with wisdom, even if they don't like what you say. I'm very proud of my sons, both of my sons. Tim is a designer and designs these big fancy houses at the beach, and he's just successful and doing well. And then, of course, Joel is one of our pastors here at Bayshore and is the main speaker at the Rehoboth campus. A couple of years back, Joel, was doing such a good job, and he was invited one night to come out to a family's house that invited him over. And this family invited Joel over, and little did he know it was an ambush. They invited him over there, and they sat him in a chair in the kitchen, and they just began to rip him apart. They began to say everything that he was doing wrong, and how his sermons weren't this and his sermons weren't that. And Joel just kind of took that. And I remember, hearing that story. And of course, that's part of leadership. And I knew Joel had to walk through that. And I just could imagine what it was like for Joel to get in that car by himself and drive home after that. Sometimes when you're criticized, you can feel incredibly isolated, and you can feel completely alone. And God just has continued to bless Joel. He kept his heart right. That family left the church, and 10 families came to sit in that chair because God blesses him, and he has a great, great attitude about that. But it's painful. It's painful to be criticized, and it's painful to go through that. And when you're being criticized as any type of leader, you can feel isolated. Some of our community leaders that are in politics, that are leading our community, that's a lonely place to be and making these tough decisions during this time. Mike Huckabee said, if you can't stand the sight of your own blood, you shouldn't go into politics. And that's a very, very tough thing that these gentlemen and ladies in our community are going through. And so I know, and if you're leading anything, if you're leading your company, if you're leading your family as a single parent, if you're leading something, the feeling of making those hard decisions and feeling all alone and feeling isolated. And in that isolation, you can become hopeless, that nobody understands, nobody gets it, nobody's with me. You think about Elijah in the Old Testament, in the 8th century, I believe it was the 8th century, he was prophesying to the northern kingdom against Ahab and Jezebel, and he said, I'm the only prophet left. I'm the only prophet left. And they're going to kill me, God, and you're not going to have any prophets. God had other prophets, of course, but Elijah felt like he was the only one because he was standing alone for something very important. You know what I think is important for us to remember? And this whole idea about criticism making us feel isolated. I think it's important for us to remember that we should major on encouragement and minor on criticism. We should major on encouragement and we should minor on criticism. I think we need to do 95% encouragement and 5% criticism. I think we need to be very, very more attuned to encouraging people and lifting people up and loving people. In our community, in our country, has become so toxic that we're so critical of everybody, that we're putting everybody down. Anybody that doesn't think like we think, we're attacking people over and over again. And we have this toxic environment in our country that we're overcritical. We have this incredible freedom, the right to speech, but this right to speech has gotten so poisonous that it's unhealthy for our country. You know, on Facebook sometimes you have to put a helmet on when you go on Facebook. There's so many heavy things on there. And what I try to do on Facebook, those of you that listen to my 2-minute broadcast that I put out a couple times a week, I try to be Lysol on Facebook. I try to be something positive. I want to have a positive word to people that are struggling. But you know, encouragement is so important. What is encouragement? Encouragement is when you see somebody carrying a cup, and that cup is just about empty. And what encouragement is you take some cold water and you pour it into their cup and you encourage them. Jesus said this in Matthew. He said, if you give a cup of cold water to a prophet, you will receive a prophet's reward. In other words, we need to look for people that need some encouragement, that need some building up, that need some love and need some strength. And it can be our children. We need to encourage our children. We need to encourage our spouse. When's the last time, if you're a man, and if you don't do most of the cooking, sometimes the men do the cooking these days, sometimes the women do. I don't know who cooks in your family, but Karen does the primary. She does primary. That would be 99.9% of the cooking in our family. And you know what? We've been married 43 years. This coming week, 43 years we'll be married. You know what? After 43 years, I still say to her on a regular basis, 2 or 3 times a week, man, that was a great meal. Thank you so much. That's the best Spam soup we've ever had. I just say, oh, that's an amazing hot dog. No, she cooks all. In fact, last night we had pork sirloin and fresh squash and tomatoes and potatoes, and it was amazing. And I always say, honey, you did such a good job. Thank you so much. You know what we need to put in our marriage? We need to put words back like thank you. I appreciate that. You're amazing. We need to do that because that is part of what makes relationships work, because relationships thrive on encouragement, not on criticism. When we're criticized, it shuts us down. It shuts us down. You know, if we major on criticism toward other people, it makes people feel isolated, makes them feel all alone. And when we criticize them, they go into that little cave all by themselves and they feel alone and isolated. But when you encourage somebody, you draw them out and they feel more and more emboldened and more motivated to do things in life. Now, it's an interesting thing. When I was in University of Delaware, I was taking a class, history class. That was my major, and I took a history class with Bill Williams, who's famous at the University of Delaware. He's written a lot of books about Sussex County. He's written books about Delaware. Bill Williams, incredible teacher, and he was a very, very hard teacher, and everybody was scared of him. And you go to his class, I mean, it's intense. I mean, you had to be ready. You had to know what the readings were, and you had to be ready for that class, and he'd call on you all the time. And I remember we had this test one time, and he's given back the test, the little blue books, he's given back the test. And as he's giving back the test, he said, he came to me and he said, I'm going to keep your test. I want to talk about your test. I said, oh my gosh. I thought, I'm in big trouble now. And he kept a few other students. And he held up those blue books and he said, listen, we didn't do so good on the essays. And I thought, oh my gosh, my essay was terrible. He said, but these are really good essays. And he read my essay in front of the class, and the other students that did well as well read their essay. You know what it did for me? It motivated me. I worked harder than I ever had in that class because that little bit of encouragement stimulated me to want to do better. Last week I preached our third part of our series on death. Not the easiest message to preach, but something important, because my goal as a pastor is not to preach what people want to hear, but what they need to hear. And sometimes what they need to hear is the same thing as they want to hear. So, I preached that, and it was not the easiest message to preach, but an important message for all of us. But I remember going home, and on Monday, I had a lot of things happening and a lot of things going on. And I remember, feeling just a little bit down. And Karen came in with the mail, and she came in with the mail, and there's a letter from a friend I had in Pennsylvania. Used to be my district overseer, who I was ordained under, a guy named Wes Clemmer, and he had a letter there for me. And Karen opened the letter, and she handed it to me, and I read the letter. And I haven't heard from Wes in I don't know how many years. I haven't heard from him in 2 or 3 years. And he wrote me a letter, and he said, Danny, I just want to let you know that Vern and I we just been reading through some of the books that we have on our shelf, rereading some books and talking about them. And he said, recently we pulled off your book off the shelf called What Am I Thinking, that I wrote back in 2004. And he said, we read that book and we just were blessed. It was such a wonderful read. It really spoke to us, especially during COVID-19 times. And he gave me this incredible, encouraging word. You know what happened? I'm writing my second book right now. And when I got that letter, you know what? This week I wrote more on my new book than I have in weeks, because encouragement motivates. Can you say that with me there in Fenwick Island? Everybody at Fenwick Island, can you say that with me? Encouragement motivates. And if you're at watching us online, maybe people are there in the living room, you're together, would you just say this? Encouragement motivates. Encouragement motivates. When you criticize, it doesn't motivate you. It takes away your motivation. The other thing about encouragement is if we'll encourage each other during these times, we won't feel as isolated as we've been feeling. If we'll be proactively encouraging other people, we won't feel as isolated as what we have been feeling. And you know what? I always say this, and many of you have heard me say this many times. You cannot help another person without helping yourself. You cannot help another person without helping yourself. The Bible says in the book of Proverbs, listen to this, he who refreshes others refreshes himself. He who refreshes others refreshes themselves. So when you encourage somebody, you get refreshed and you get encouraged, and you are lifted up by lifting up someone else. An important principle. So the worst thing we can do in COVID-19, the worst thing we can do in these kind of dark, shadowy times is to go into a cave and to be isolated and to not reach out. And you don't want to be the kind of person that's waiting for everybody to come to you, because there's two kinds of people. There's one kind of person that walks into a room and says, here I am, and meaning, come make me feel better. That's one type of person. Or there's a person that says, there you are. When you walk into a room, don't say, here I am, come minister to me. You walk into a room and say, there you are, and you make other people around you feel good. Because he who refreshes others refreshes him or herself. Every time you encourage somebody, you encourage yourself. Every time you give somebody a pat on the back, you encourage yourself. And we want to do it to everybody in our community. Everybody needs encouragement. Everybody needs encouragement. The other day, Karen and I, last Sunday after church, we went to Applebee's, and the waitress we had was amazing. She was absolutely amazing, and she did an incredible job. And we just told her at the end of our meal, you were incredible. You did a great job. Now, sometimes you don't always have that experience. You don't want to lie. If the waitress was terrible, you don't want to say that. You may want to say, have you considered another career? I mean, sometimes those people, they need that. But this gal did so good, and we just encouraged her. And she did such a good job. Encourage everybody in our community. Encourage the teachers. Encourage the staff. I'd love to encourage Bayshore to encourage the wonderful staff that we have here. All the media people, all the people leading worship at every campus. We have the most amazing worship leaders. We have the best media people. We have the best host team people. We have people serving in so many ways. So when you see somebody at Bayshore that's serving, just give them a high five. Give them some encouragement, because we will thrive when we encourage other people. Because when you encourage others, you help yourself. You help yourself. And my dad, the other day, I talked to my dad. I called him and asked him how he was doing. And he said he was telling me about his sermon. And I asked him, always ask him how he did on his sermon, how church service went. He said, something happened to me the other week, Danny. He said, I want to tell you about it. He said I was going to the bank to make a deposit. And when he pulled into the bank, and there was a homeless woman that was there, an older homeless woman. And he had seen her before, and she was homeless. And really, he said she looked like she was in really bad shape. And so he went into the bank, and my dad, he had a $5 bill and a $1 bill in his pocket. And he thought to himself, I'm not going to go out that way. I'm not going to give that woman any money. I mean, I don't know why he was thinking that. He just said, I'm going to go out the back so I don't have to go by him. Then the Lord kind of spoke to him, you go out there and you give her some money. And he thought he was going to give her the $1 bill. Just give her, maybe she can get something to drink. Give her a $1 bill. So he got there, and my dad's, they call him Pastor Tight. He's a little tight. And that's where Joel gets it from. And so he's a little bit like that. And so he said, the Lord told him give her the $5 bill. And so he gave her the $5 bill. And I'm thinking the whole time, why don't you give her the whole $6, But he gave her the $5 bill. And that was Saturday morning at the bank. And he went home, and he said that afternoon he got a call from somebody that used to rent from him that left it sort of in the middle of the night like a couple years ago and owed him a bunch of money. And that person called. They were convicted, and they said, hey, listen, we're going to bring you by a check for $1,000. We owe you $1,000. And so sure enough, they brought by that check for $1,000 on Saturday night. And my dad, Luke 6:38, he connected Luke 6:38, given it shall be given unto you. And I don't know what you think about that. Maybe you don't think that's just coincidence. But here's what I think about that. Here's what I think about that principle. When you help somebody and you give something to somebody else, encourage them, you always get back a lot more. You always get back a lot more when you give and you help somebody else. It's an important principle in life because everybody needs encouragement. Everybody needs encouragement. Our policemen need encouragement. These are crazy times, of course, and obviously in any field, in any endeavor in life, if you sell cars, or if you're a business, there's always bad people in every field of vocation. But the majority of people are good people, and the majority of policemen are good people. And so we want to encourage people in our community. Encourage our nurses, encourage our doctors, encourage our policemen. Next time you're pulled over for speeding and they give you that ticket, I just say to them, hey, you're doing a great job. You're doing a great job. Maybe you can say, hey, how about where can I give you a tip on top of this? Maybe you won't want to say that. Maybe that's going a little too far. But say this with me, everybody needs encouragement. Everybody needs encouragement. I'll close with this. I'm about out of time. Some of you heard me tell this story before. One of my favorite stories is when the story about Abraham Lincoln. Of course, he was assassinated April 14th, 1865. April 14th was a Friday, and it happened to be Good Friday, which is interesting. And he was shot at Ford's Theater, and then he was carried across the street. And I've been in that building. Some of you have as well. If you toured Washington and been in that building where Lincoln died. But in his pockets, he had some things. He had a Brooks Brothers overcoat on. And in that Brooks Brother overcoat, they found several things that were interesting. And in that Brooks Brother coat, they found a couple pair of glasses. He had some eye problems. Did you know that Lincoln was only 56 years old when he was assassinated? Only 56 years old. And he had two pair of eyeglasses, had a watch fob. He had a wallet, and in the wallet he had a little bit of money, but he had a $5 Confederate bill. $5 Confederate bill that they think maybe when Richmond fell, he went to Richmond and he got it as a souvenir. Had a $5 Confederate bill. He had the wallet, and then he had a handkerchief with a big A on it. There was a cufflink in there with the L on it. But then there were 8 newspaper articles. 8 newspaper articles. And the 8 newspaper articles were recent articles that had been written in favor of Lincoln. Lincoln had been a polarizing figure as a president and had been heavily criticized as a president. And he received a lot of criticism, and people hated Lincoln. But in his pocket, he had 8 newspaper articles that said he was doing a good job. So evidently, even Abraham Lincoln needed encouragement. It doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter how successful you are, doesn't matter how stoic you are on the outside. Everybody needs a high five. Everybody needs encouragement. And this is a season of life in America when we need to minimize criticism and maximize encouragement. And listen, there's people that are going through the same thing you're going through right now. People that love you and care about you, and the Lord is with you. It says He will never leave you or forsake you. It says that in Joshua, and then it's repeated in the book of Hebrews. Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. There's 2 times that the Lord is with you. The Lord is with you when you feel His presence and you feel like He's with you. And He's also with you when you don't feel His presence and you don't feel like He's with you. He will always be with you. Even though it says in Psalm 23, I pass through the valley of shadow of death. Literally it says, even though I pass through a dark valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Would you say this with me right now as we close? Would you say, Lord, you are with me? One more time with your hands lifted up in Fenwick Island. Those of you that are at home right now can lift your hands. Say, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Let's pray together. I love you. We'll see you next week for a new series called Pitfalls. And I'm looking forward to being with you next week. But let's pray together right now. Let me pray for you and let me minister to you. And then we're going to have a final song at our campuses. And we just want to see the Holy Spirit minister to you this morning. Let's bow our heads in prayer right now. Lord, we want to thank you for your divine presence. Lord, you are with us wherever we go. If we're in the valley, if we're on top of the mountain, if we are thinking clearly or if we're confused, you are with us. You haven't forsaken us. Lord, you said about the Apostle Paul in the book of Acts that the Lord stood near Paul. Even in the midst of the storm, you stood near Paul. So, Lord, we thank you that you're with us, and we thank you that we don't have to be hopeless. We may feel lonely, we may feel isolated, but the truth is that you're with us, and others love us and care about us. So we pray that the Holy Spirit this week will empower us with the joy of the Lord, and may the joy of the Lord be our strength. In Jesus' name, and everybody said amen and amen. Love you guys. I'll see you next week.